Hundreds of people riding on top of a moving train in real life. And if you think that's the extreme, you're about to miss what comes next. Because what follows are trains that move through crowds, through buildings, and across landscapes that don't seem possible, including one that runs across what looks like a pink ocean. And by the end, one of these will stand out for a completely different reason. During the Bishwa Ijtema in Bangladesh, one of the largest religious gatherings in the world, the railway system is pushed far beyond its limits. Trains designed for a few hundred passengers end up carrying several thousand people at once. With no space left inside, passengers climb onto the roof, hang from the doors, and even stand between the carriages. Some travel more than 30 kilometers, that's around 18 miles, like this, just to reach the event. But what makes this even more remarkable isn't just the number of people, it's how organized the chaos actually is. Because in another part of the world, the situation is completely different. There, the train doesn't slow down for people at all. Just outside Bangkok, there's a railway where the train doesn't avoid the crowd. The crowd moves for the train. Several times a day, a full-size train passes directly through a working market. Vendors place their goods, fresh fruit, seafood, even cooked meals, right next to the tracks, leaving only a narrow gap. When the train approaches, a warning signal sounds, and within seconds, umbrellas are folded, goods are pulled back, and the entire market shifts just enough to let the train pass through. The clearance is often less than a meter, that's about 3 feet, on each side. And once the train is gone, everything returns to normal in under a minute. This railway has been operating like this for decades, with both vendors and train operators following a precise, almost routine choreography. But what makes it even more unusual isn't how close the train gets, it's how predictable everything is. Because in the next location, the environment isn't controlled at all, and the train moves through something that looks completely unreal. In the Altai region of Russia, a railway cuts across a vast salt lake, creating one of the most unusual train routes in the world. From above, the track appears to split the water into 2 distinct colors. On one side, the lake can turn deep red or pink due to salt-loving algae, while the other side remains a muted blue or gray. The railway itself is used for transporting salt and minerals, not passengers, and stretches for several kilometers, that's a few miles, directly across the water. There are no barriers. No surrounding landscape, just a straight line of track across a flat, reflective surface. Depending on the season and mineral concentration, the colors can shift dramatically, making the train look like it's moving through a surreal environment. But what makes this even more unusual isn't just the color, it's how isolated the entire route feels. Because in the next place, the train is surrounded by the exact opposite. Instead of open space, it's enclosed on all sides. In Chongqing, China, a train doesn't go around buildings, it goes through one. A residential apartment block was designed with a railway line built directly into its structure. The train passes through the middle floors, stopping at a station inside the building itself. Despite the unusual design, the system is heavily insulated, keeping noise levels around 60 decibel, similar to a normal conversation. But what makes this even more interesting isn't the engineering, it's how naturally people have adapted to it. And in the next location, adaptation happens in a very different way. A train running directly across the top of a dam, with water stretching out on both sides. In central Thailand, the railway at Sak Jolasid Dam creates exactly that scene. For a short section of the route, the track runs straight across the dam itself, surrounded by open water, with almost no visual separation between the train and the reservoir. When water levels are high, it can look as if the train is moving across the surface of a lake. This section is only a few hundred meters long, but it completely changes how the railway feels. Trains here move slowly, partly because of the narrow alignment, but also because this stretch has become a popular viewing point. But what makes this location interesting isn't just the setting, it's how calm it feels. There's no chaos, no crowd, no urgency. And that calm doesn't last. Because in the next place, the railway is anything but stable. A train moving along a wooden structure attached to the side of a cliff. In Western Thailand, this is part of what's known as the Death Railway. Originally built during World War II, the line stretches over 400 kilometers, that's about 250 miles, and was constructed under extreme conditions using forced labor. One of its most recognizable sections runs along the edge of a cliff above the Kwai Noi River, supported by wooden trestles that appear far less solid than modern infrastructure. The train moves slowly here, navigating tight curves and narrow ledges where there is little margin for error. Some sections were carved directly into rock, while others rely entirely on wooden frameworks that follow the shape of the cliff. Although the structure has been reinforced over time, much of its original layout remains unchanged. And when the train passes through this area, the exposure becomes very clear. There's very little separating the track from the drop below. But what stands out even more is how this railway was built quickly, under pressure, and at a massive human cost. And after something this constrained, the next crossing opens up completely, out into open water. A train once crossed open sea with nothing but water on both sides. For decades, this was the reality on the Pamban Bridge in southern India. Stretching about 2.1 kilometers, that's roughly 1.3 miles, it connected the mainland to Ramswaram Island, carrying trains across one of the most exposed railway sections in the region. There were no solid barriers along most of the track, just rails, wind, and the open sea. That exposure wasn't theoretical. In 1964, a powerful cyclone struck this area, tearing apart sections of the bridge and causing one of the deadliest railway disasters in India's history. After that, every crossing carried a certain weight. Trains moved carefully, often slowing down when winds picked up, as waves crashed below and gusts pushed from the sides. At the center, a movable section would lift to let ships pass, adding another layer of complexity to an already fragile crossing. Today, trains no longer run on this original structure. A new bridge is replacing it, built to handle conditions that once made this route so dangerous. And from here, the environment changes again. This time, the danger comes from something far less visible. In Colorado, the Durango and Silverton Railroad follows a route carved into steep canyon walls more than a century ago. The line runs for about 72 kilometers, that's roughly 45 miles, through the San Juan Mountains, originally built in the 1880s to transport silver and gold. In several sections, the track sits directly on narrow ledges, with the Animas River flowing tens of meters, over 100 feet below. There are no guardrails in these areas, and the distance between the train and the edge can feel minimal. Steam locomotives are still used on many journeys, moving slowly along the cliffs, which makes the exposure even more noticeable. But what makes this route stand out isn't just the height. It's how precisely the railway follows the natural shape of the canyon. Every curve, every ledge, every section is dictated by the terrain. And that same idea appears again in the next location, but taken to a much more extreme level. In Ecuador, a railway known as the Devil's Nose was built to overcome one of the steepest sections of track ever attempted. Instead of following a direct path, the train moves forward and backward along a series of switchbacks to manage the gradient. This allows it to descend hundreds of meters, several hundred feet, along a nearly vertical rock face. The route was completed in the early 20th century and required workers to carve through solid rock in extremely difficult conditions. Even today, the train moves slowly through this section, carefully reversing direction multiple times to continue its descent. From above, the track looks almost impossible, cutting sharply into the mountainside. But what makes this railway especially unusual isn't just the steepness, it's the way it moves. Instead of flowing continuously, the journey is broken into controlled steps. And after something so constrained and directional, the next place removes all of those limits. In parts of Utah, freight railways cut across open desert, passing through red rock formations and wide exposed terrain. These routes can stretch for hundreds of kilometers. That's well over 100 miles, often with little to no infrastructure nearby. Unlike mountain railways, where the terrain controls every movement, these lines run in long, uninterrupted sections. Trains here are typically much longer as well, sometimes extending over a kilometer. The contrast between the train and the landscape is what stands out most. The railway appears small, almost temporary, against massive rock formations and open space. But what makes this environment different isn't difficulty, it's isolation. There are long stretches where no towns, roads, or people are visible at all. Just track, desert, and distance. And after this kind of open space, the next railway shifts the experience again, this time bringing the train right back to the edge of the water. Just a few meters from the ocean, waves crash directly beside an active railway line. Along the southwest coast of Sri Lanka, this route runs parallel to the sea for long stretches, creating one of the closest interactions between train and ocean anywhere in the world. In some sections, the distance between the track and the water is less than 5 meters. That's about 16 feet. There are no large barriers separating the railway from the shoreline, and during high tide, waves can reach the level of the tracks. This line is part of the coastal railway connecting Colombo with cities further south, and it has been in operation since the late 19th century. Trains here move at moderate speeds, but the environment constantly shifts depending on weather and sea conditions. Passengers often experience ocean spray reaching the windows, especially during rough seas. But what makes this route especially unusual isn't just how close it gets to the water, it's how long that exposure lasts. For kilometers at a time, miles of uninterrupted coastline, the train remains right at the edge. And after following a line this open and exposed, the next railway moves into something far more enclosed. In northern Queensland, Australia, this railway climbs from sea level into the mountains through thick tropical forest. The route runs for about 37 kilometers, that's roughly 23 miles, and passes through dozens of curves, tunnels, and bridges. Originally built in the late 1800s to support mining, the line now serves primarily as a scenic route. What makes this journey stand out is how quickly the environment changes. Within a short distance, the landscape shifts from open views to tightly enclosed sections where the forest nearly touches the train. Waterfalls appear directly beside the track, and in some places, the railway crosses narrow bridges suspended above deep valleys. The train moves slowly through these areas, partly due to the terrain, but also to allow clear visibility along the curves. But what makes this route different isn't just the density of the surroundings, it's how limited the view becomes. At times, you can't see more than a few meters ahead. And after being enclosed like this, the next railway opens up again, revealing something much more structured and precise. A curved stone viaduct emerging directly from a mountainside, carrying a train across open space. In Switzerland, this structure forms part of a railway that crosses one of the most recognizable bridges in Europe. The Landwasser Viaduct stands about 65 meters high, that's roughly 213 feet, and spans 136 meters, or around 446 feet, across a deep valley. Built in 1902, it connects directly into a tunnel carved into the rock face, creating a seamless transition between solid mountain and open air. Unlike modern concrete bridges, this one is constructed entirely from limestone, with 6 tall arches supporting the track. Trains move steadily across the viaduct, maintaining a controlled speed due to the curve and elevation. From a distance, the structure appears almost symmetrical, but its position is precisely aligned with the surrounding terrain. But what makes this crossing especially striking isn't just the height, it's the precision of its design. Every angle, every curve, every connection is deliberate. And after something so structured, the next route changes the experience again, this time climbing even higher into the mountains. In western Norway, the Flåm Railway connects the village of Flåm at sea level with the mountain station of Myrdal. Climbing about 866 meters, that's roughly 2,841 feet over just 20 kilometers, or around 12 miles. This makes it one of the steepest standard gauge railway lines in the world, with gradients reaching up to 5.5%. To manage the climb, the track winds through 20 tunnels, many of which were carved manually into the rock. Some of these tunnels spiral inside the mountain to gradually gain height without increasing the slope too much. Water is a constant presence here. The route passes multiple waterfalls, including the Causeway, where water drops over 90 meters. That's about 295 feet close to the track. Trains move slowly along this route, partly because of the gradient, but also to maintain control during both ascent and descent. But what stands out isn't just the steepness, it's how quickly the environment shifts from sea level to high mountain terrain. And that vertical movement doesn't stop here, because the next railway climbs even higher into thinner air and harsher conditions. Thin air, snow-covered peaks, and a railway built to reach one of the highest accessible points in the Alps. In Switzerland, this route climbs to an altitude of about 3,089 meters. That's roughly 10,135 feet, using a cogwheel system designed for steep mountain terrain. Unlike standard railways, this system uses a central rack rail, allowing the train to maintain traction on gradients that would otherwise be too steep. The line runs for about 9.3 kilometers, or around 5.8 miles, from Zermatt to the summit. As elevation increases, the environment changes rapidly. Vegetation disappears, temperatures drop, and snow can remain present for most of the year. At higher sections, oxygen levels are noticeably lower and weather conditions can shift quickly. The railway operates year-round, even in winter, with specially designed equipment to handle snow and ice. But what makes this route different isn't just the altitude, it's the transition. From a village setting to high alpine terrain in under an hour. And after reaching this kind of elevation, the next location shifts completely. From mountains back into the middle of a city. In the German city of Wuppertal, this system has been operating since 1901, making it one of the oldest elevated transport systems of its kind. The line stretches about 13.3 kilometers. That's roughly 8.3 miles, and most of it runs directly above the Wupper River. Instead of rails on the ground, the cars hang from a track mounted above them, creating a completely different form of movement. This design was chosen because the valley is narrow, with limited space for conventional railways or roads. The system allows continuous movement through the city without interfering with street-level traffic. Despite its unusual appearance, it functions as a regular part of the public transport network, carrying thousands of passengers daily. The speed is relatively moderate, but the perspective is what makes it stand out. Passengers travel above the water, suspended between structures, with the city moving around them. And after something this integrated into a city, the next railway feels far more isolated, far away from everything. In Utah, a railway causeway stretches across the Great Salt Lake, creating a striking visual contrast that is visible even from space. The structure runs for about 20 kilometers. That's roughly 12 miles, connecting the eastern and western shores. What makes this location unusual is not just the railway itself, but how it affects the lake. On one side, the water often appears deep blue, while on the other, it can turn pink due to high salinity and the presence of microorganisms like algae and bacteria. For decades, the solid causeway limited water flow between the two sides, intensifying the difference in color. In recent years, a breach was added to allow more mixing, but the contrast can still be seen under the right conditions. Freight trains regularly use this route, moving slowly across the flat, open surface. There is no surrounding landscape, just water in every direction. And that sense of isolation changes dramatically in the next location, where the journey becomes long, exposed, and physically demanding. In Mauritania, one of the longest trains in the world travels between the mining town of Zouérat and the port city of Nouadhibou. The full journey covers about 700 kilometers. That's roughly 435 miles and can take more than 12 hours. The train itself can reach lengths of over 2.5 kilometers. That's about 1.5 miles, with dozens of wagons carrying raw iron ore. Although there is a passenger carriage, many people choose, or are forced, to ride on top of the open freight cars. There is no shelter from the sun, no protection from wind, and temperatures can vary dramatically between day and night. Sand, dust, and heat are constant factors throughout the journey. Despite these conditions, this route is widely used as an essential form of transportation. But what makes this experience stand out isn't just the distance, it's the exposure. Passengers remain completely unprotected for the entire journey. And after something this extreme, the next route feels almost the opposite: closer, calmer, and far more familiar. In Ireland, the line between Bray and Greystones follows a narrow coastal path carved between rock and sea. This section is only a few kilometers long, that's just a couple of miles, but it offers one of the most scenic short railway segments in the region. On one side, steep rock faces rise sharply above the track. On the other, the Irish Sea stretches out, often with strong winds and waves breaking against the shoreline below. The route was originally opened in the 19th century and required careful engineering to fit within such a limited space. Trains here move at moderate speeds, following the natural curve of the coastline. The proximity to both the cliff and the sea creates a constant sense of enclosure, even in an open environment. But what makes this route stand out isn't difficulty, it's balance. The railway fits precisely between two opposing forces: land and water. And after something this contained, the final location shifts once more, outward into open space. Just off the southeastern coast of England, in the UK, the Southend Pier Railway runs along the longest pleasure pier in the world. Extending about 2.1 kilometers, that's roughly 1.3 miles into the Thames estuary. And unlike everything you've seen so far, this one isn't dangerous at all. In fact, it exists for the exact opposite reason. The shallow waters here made it impossible for larger boats to reach the shore, so the pier was built to stretch far enough out to deeper water where ships could dock. Over time, that necessity turned into something entirely different. A railway that doesn't overcome danger, but removes it. Instead of cliffs, chaos, or risk, this track offers a straight, stable path above the water. No obstacles, no extremes, just a quiet journey from land into open space. But that's exactly why it stands out, because after everything you've seen, this is the only railway that was never meant to challenge the world, only to reach it. And sometimes, the most unusual journeys aren't the ones that test how far you can go, but how simply you can get there.